Not exactly. It's a dreary old day here in DC. I've got to tell you today, Laura, and the President stood in the rain as he paid his respects, and he touched a wreath over there at the Arlington National Cemetery. That's where he paid his respects today for Veterans Day, while the President-elect, he was at a different service, a different ceremony, and a different memorial as well. That was at the Korean War Memorial. So a temporary cooling of post-election relations. But count goes on. Or in the state of Georgia's case, it starts again, because the Secretary of State there today announced that it will be redone by hand because the count was so close. Less than 0.1%, or about 14,000 votes in it. That was in favour of the President-elect. So here was the Secretary of State announcing that a little earlier today.
This race has national significance, national importance. We get that. We understand that. We do. We follow the process, and we understand the significance of this for not just Georgia, but for every single American. At the end of the day, when we do a hand count, then we can answer the question exactly what was the final margin in this race.
Meanwhile, the Trump campaign has launched a fresh lawsuit in the state of Michigan. They believe that Republican challengers weren't able to view the counting process as close as Democrats were. They have already had a lawsuit thrown out in Michigan, so we'll have to wait and see how this one plays out. But at last count, Trump is way behind in the state of Michigan. He's about 145,000 votes behind Joe Biden. That's at the last look. And meanwhile, he's also continuing to turn his attention to the state of Pennsylvania. This after the commissioner in Philadelphia was on CNN this morning. Let's have a look at this grab, and then we'll get the President's response after that.
We just had the most transparent and secure election in the history of Philadelphia. And the people here work night and day to do our job to count those votes.
So to answer your first question there, Laura, we have heard from the President today, and once again it came on his Twitter account, and it was in response to that interview. He says a guy named Al Schmidt, a Philadelphia commissioner and so-called Republican, is being used big time by the fake news media to explain how honest things were with respect to the election in Philadelphia. He refuses to look at a mountain of corruption and honesty. We win, is what the President said. This is one of those tweets that was flagged by Twitter. They believe, and many too also believe, that there hasn't been any evidence of widespread corruption or misuse or irregularities when it comes to the state of Pennsylvania. But the legal process is doing its best at the moment, and at last count as well, when it comes to the state of Pennsylvania, which had its 20 votes in the Electoral College that basically handed Joe Biden the presidency. There's about 50,000 votes in it, which is outside that margin of a recount.
Yeah, right. So that's why the recount's happening in Georgia, because it almost automatically triggers that recount as well. I mean, when you look at the claims by Donald Trump, levels of corruption in some of these states, he's filing lawsuits here, there and everywhere, but he'd really need to flip like 3 or 4 states for him to flip the result, wouldn't he?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And when there is a recount, usually there might just be a couple of irregularities where a few hundred votes are turned. But like you said, there are a few different states. Let's have a look at a couple of them. Pennsylvania, there's 50,000 votes difference in favour of Biden. Georgia, 14,000, but it is heading to a recount. Michigan, 145,000. Arizona, 13,000. Nevada, 35,000. So there's a whole lot of votes there to overturn, and it just seems unlikely.